So everybody, welcome to another conversation with Preach, and I'm delighted to welcome to the conversation this time somebody who's produced some fantastic resources for Lent. They are fresh, they're engaging, and they are really relevant to what's going on in the UK, in the church and in our society today. So here is Chris Shannahan from Coventry University, and I'm going to ask him to introduce himself a little bit more and to tell us more about his actual title as a lecturer and his background in the church as well. Hi, Chris.
Hi there, Louisa. Thanks very much indeed for the chance to share with you. It's a real privilege. I'm an associate professor, as you say, at Coventry University, an associate professor in political theology at the Centre for Trust, Peace and Social Relations, which is based at Coventry University. So my teaching and my research focuses on the relationship between faith and politics, theology and issues of social justice. There's a much longer version than that, but I think that's probably it in a nutshell. Yeah. Before coming to the Centre for Trust, Peace and Social Relations at Coventry about 6 years ago, I taught theology at Manchester University, and before that at the University of Birmingham. And before that, I worked for a number of years as a circuit minister in the Methodist Church in inner city London, inner city Birmingham, and out of that experience made the move about 13 or 14 years ago to express and articulate my vocation in a slightly different way, teaching and researching issues of faith and social justice in a university context. And that's where I am now.
Wow, that's fascinating. And that gives us a lot of confidence actually in the resources that you've produced, because it's absolutely clear where your background comes in terms of your faith commitment and understanding, your application of theology through your work, and moving that into the academic research sphere because of what you've seen around you in the UK. Mm-hmm. So that's fascinating. Thank you so much. We're really specifically talking about one project you've been involved with, which is called Life on the Breadline, and the resources you've produced for that, which have led to a Lent course, which is fresh. It's full of new information and new material, and it's fresh out this year for people to engage with for the very first time. I'd just like you to explain the origins of the Life on the Breadline project and how it came into being.
Of course, thank you very much. There are three origins, I suppose. The first is personal commitment. The second is my commitment as a researcher to develop theology that engages with issues of social justice, to develop theology in a university context that addresses questions of poverty, inequality, power, powerlessness, and helps to bring about a change. Not interested in ivory tower research, but in research that engages with real communities, real lives, and real issues of social justice, and enables church and policymakers, practitioners and preachers to engage with issues of social justice. And one of the greatest issues of social justice from a political perspective and from a faith perspective, I would argue, in the UK in 2022 is the growth of poverty and inequality during what's often been referred to as the age of austerity since the 2008 financial crash. We've had about a decade or so of policies that have led, many would argue, and I would argue, to increases in poverty and increasing inequality. So, for example, in 2008, the Christian-based Trussell Trust, the largest provider of food banks in the UK, provided approximately 25,000 three-day vouchers for 3 days worth of food. About 25,000. By the time we reached 2021, 25,000 had grown to 1.9 million. So we are talking a massive exponential growth in the numbers of people using food banks over the last decade or so. Why does this project matter? This project matters because 15 million of our neighbours in the UK are living in poverty. It matters because 25% of children in the UK grow up in poverty. It matters because the gains that have been made in relation to declining levels, particularly of child poverty, have gone into reverse with the closure of Sure Start centres, cuts in welfare spending, cuts to children's and youth services. And all of those changes, that growth in poverty and inequality in the UK has occurred on the back of existing inequality in the UK. So we've not all been hit by austerity to the same degree. People who were living in poverty pre-2008 are the ones that have been hardest hit. And things have just got progressively worse during the ongoing COVID pandemic. So that, for me, is the why. This is an issue of current, urgent, spiritual, political, and academic concern. For me, it's an issue of mission. It's an imperative that as people of faith rooted in the scriptures, we respond. And Life on the Breadline has been a project exploring the ways in which Christians in the UK have responded to growing levels of poverty and inequality during the age of austerity. Because in spite of the fact that there are more often than we care to mention headlines about church in decline, the reality is that the church is more engaged, more involved, more influential in pretty much every community up and down the land because of its presence and its roots and its relationships, what's often referred to as social capital, in local communities. And so the question is, against the backdrop of growing poverty and inequality, how does the church use its influence in relation to the question, the growth of poverty and inequality? And so we've tracked the ways in which different responses that churches have made across the UK, from in Scotland, Northern Ireland, Wales, and England as well. And one of the things that we found is that there are a range of responses, from caring responses, the food bank response, as it were, through to campaigning for structural change and a living wage. And so what we are wanting to ask the church, what we are wanting to invite those of us who lead worship or lead study groups or lead Bible studies, is to ask, is it enough to respond to Jesus' call in Matthew 25 by feeding the hungry, clothing the naked, and welcoming the stranger, if we do not do anything about the systems and the structures and the conditions that lead people to need the food bank in the first place? One of the strands within liberation theology that we've found resonates still in the UK is the assertion that the God of love, who creates us all of equal worth in God's own image, necessarily has a preferential option for the poor in a society that is structurally unjust and treats some people as if they are more valuable than others. Not because rich people are wicked and poor people are saints, but because poverty contradicts the will of a just and loving God. And so there is a challenge there. How, as church, do we respond? And that's where this project, I think, can, we hope, have an impact on church practice and on the leading of worship.
Mm. Well, that gives us a lot of confidence in the material you've produced with that background. And thank you for explaining the theology behind it too, the liberation theology. I think that will resonate so much with people. We've had quite an education in the last 2 years, and that's involved looking at our relationships with our Black brothers and sisters as well as part of liberation theology. And that's a factor too in poverty in the UK as well. Depending on the colour of your skin can be a big impact.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah. I mean, what we found is that Black Britons, people with disabilities, single parents, and younger people have tended to be harder hit by austerity policies than people that look and sound like me. And so the challenge for the church is, what do we do with that? How does that impact on the way we think about our prayer life, our worship, our approach to scripture, our engagement in the wider community?
Well, let's look at the Life on the Breadline Lent resources in a bit more detail, because I think they have some answers and pointers for people that are really, really helpful. Let's talk about the 6 themes that are inside the Lent course. So it's set out in 6 sessions that can be run weekly. They are, looking at it, I would say, predominantly suit group work, so small groups and house groups.
Yeah.
Ideally, I can imagine a church commissioning all of their small group leaders to run it through Lent. That would be amazing. But people have different needs and priorities. So would you explain the 6 themes that are across the 6 sessions?
Absolutely, of course I will. Just a word before I do, just to say, kind of ask myself and then answer another question, as it were. Where does the course come from? The course emerges, the 6 themes emerge from our research over the last 3 years. They emerge from 6 case studies that we developed in London, Birmingham, and Manchester, interviews with national church leaders, and a survey of regional church leaders from England, Scotland, Northern Ireland, and Wales. So that's where the themes emerge from. And we wanted to suggest that we need to think in a slightly different way when we think about poverty as people of faith. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., when he was going to receive his Nobel Peace Prize in the mid-60s, compared poverty to an octopus. Poverty's got it's like an octopus with many tentacles. And what we're trying to do in the Lent course is to say that often when we think of poverty, we only think of the food bank. We only think of so-called food poverty. Perhaps we don't think so much of low pay, or people surviving on 0 hours contracts, or fuel poverty, although in the coming months we might well be thinking about fuel poverty a bit more if bills are to raise. We don't always think about the connection between those things and housing justice. So what we wanted to do in this Lent course is to encourage congregations and leaders of worship and Bible study leaders to make connections, almost like a jigsaw, as it were, make connections between the different faces of poverty, because we want to suggest that they are connected, and you can't really think about one in isolation from the others. So having said that, there are 6 themes, as you say, and firstly, we talk about the first session talks about different Christian responses to poverty. We've identified a spectrum during our Life on the Breadline research, and we refer to them as a caring response, and a social responsibility, charity, welfare-based approach, the campaigning response, which is more of a social justice, for example, campaigning for a living wage kind of response.
Mm-hmm.
What's often referred to as advocacy,
Mm.
so the church speaking truth to power.
Mm-hmm.
And then fourthly, we talk about the church sustaining or supporting the development of social enterprise as a way of people building their way out of poverty in collaboration with others. So we talk about those different Christian responses to poverty in the first session.
Mm.
And then in the second session, we talk about the connection between poverty and inequality, and suggest that unless we connect poverty with inequality, we miss the kind of questions of power that we need to think about if we're going to understand the nature of poverty and the causes of poverty and who's poor and who is not. We then go on to talk in session number 3 about the connection between ethnicity and austerity, the connection between issues of racial justice and campaigning for economic justice. And that session was written by my friend and colleague, Professor Robert Beckford, who was one of the great pioneers of Black liberation theology in the UK. We then, in session number 4, kind of turn the tables, as it were, and invite people to think about something called asset-based community development. And asset-based community development, or ABCD, is a way of inverting, I suppose, the way we think about poverty. So rather than thinking about communities and people and poverty as problems that need a solution that somebody from the outside needs to come in and solve, rather than thinking about neighborhoods as problem neighborhoods, and rather than thinking about deficits, as it were, we think about assets. We think about the gifts that already exist in a local community. We think about the importance of building relationships, building a sense of community, and building a sense of togetherness as a response to inequality and hardship. So that's a different way of thinking. And it's very much a kind of an invitation, I think, to churches and other community groups to think about long-term commitments. They need to commit for the duration, as it were, rather than just parachuting in and then leaving again. Then in session 5, drawing on the tragedy of the Grenfell Tower fire as an example that we all tragically know too well, we make the connection between housing justice, poor housing, and poverty, and root those questions, as with all of the other themes, in scripture and in different approaches to faith and different theological ideas. And then finally, in the session number 6, we bring it all together and try to talk a little bit about what we would call structural injustice. So rather than thinking about poverty as if it was this separate thing in and of itself that exists apart from the systems and the structures of society, what we try to do in that final session is to invite people to make connections between poverty and employment, poverty and housing, poverty and healthcare, poverty and what our politicians, be they Labour or Conservative, are doing and saying and deciding. And think a little bit about the commitment of the church to transform systems of injustice in those marks of mission that many have committed themselves to. And then we end that final session by saying, well, what can we do? Well, one of the things that we hope people will consider is using the Life on the Breadline anti-poverty charter. lives on our website. It's something that individuals or congregations can sign up to and use to inform their work locally to make a difference.
That is brilliant. I think people will find that that setting out what the situation is, and then the ability to actually engage and take action, that is so useful. And I think what you've just explained has given depth to the project, and it's also given purpose to the project. And I think if you could explain some of the activities that are within each of the 6 Lent sessions, that would help people see more about the getting.
Absolutely, Louisa. Yeah. One of our commitments as a research team is to make the work that we're doing as accessible as possible, to make it as easy to grab hold of and use as possible. That's not to say that the work that we're producing isn't challenging. It is, but we want to make it as widely available and as easily available as possible.
Mm.
And that's why we designed the Lent course in the way that we have. It can be used in a variety of different ways. So one obvious way is for a congregation to decide, or a group of churches, a circuit, a deanery, an ecumenical churches together group, to use all 6 sessions as their Lent course for 2022. That way you get a feel, I think, for the kind of journey that I've tried to describe, and that octopus, many different faces of poverty and Christian responses to it. An alternative might be for preachers to look at the 6 sessions and to draw on those themes as resources for Sunday worship. So that's an alternative way in which the material could be used. Alternatively, it might well be that individuals are looking for their own pattern of devotions to lead them through Lent. And we hope that the Lent course might be something that individuals could use themselves. So we hope that the material can be used in a variety of different ways. And we've tried to design it in such a way. So it's as exploring different themes, but the same kind of pattern each week. We start with a short suggested opening prayer. Then there is a brief introduction to the theme, the specific theme for the week. That's followed by a short video or animation. No longer, I think the longest is 10 minutes. They're mostly somewhere between 5 and 10 minutes. So short videos. Some of the animations I think are just 2 or 3 minutes. We then have a reflection time for people to reflect on the video that they've seen, and all of these videos are free to access, like the Lent course, on the website. But I can say more about that in a minute. We then move to scripture and suggest either one or several Bible readings that people might reflect on in relation to the theme. We then have a time of reflection and questions and discussion relating to those biblical passages. And because we want the Lent course to have a kind of an energy that leads to action, we end each week with some suggested, what we call takeaway actions, things that people might do before we close in prayer. So that's the pattern each week.
It looks really accessible. I've been checking the PDF while you've been speaking to make sure you covered everything. Questions for discussion, takeaway actions, closing prayer, and a what did you think section as well.
That's right, yeah, because we're keen, we're most keen for the materials to support people in their faith journey and to have an impact on the ways in which congregations across the land think about and engage with issues of poverty and inequality in worship and in mission. But we're also very keen to hear what people think, so that as we continue to develop new resources, we might tweak things if people would like to make suggestions. But people can access all of this material really easily. It's on, if people were to go on the internet and search for Life on the Breadline, or if they just search for Breadline research, if people are on Twitter, there's a hashtag Breadline research. And then once you get onto the website, if you just look for the tab at the top of your monitor, top of the screen, it will say churches, and then there's a little drop down list, and Lent course is right there. Equally, if you want to do a shortcut, you can just search for Breadline research Lent course, and that will take you straight to these sessions. But then you'll be missing all of the other stuff that's on the website if you do that.
Basically, there is no excuse for not being able to.
No excuse whatsoever. I think in terms of accessibility, I think what is needed, in all seriousness, is there are, as you say, there are PDFs that are there that are on the website that are free to download. So what we need is, it'd be possible if somebody could go onto the website, they would need to download the PDFs. They're free to access, free to print, free to use. What you will need, though, if folk want to use the videos, is to have an internet connection, obviously, because these are online
Yes.
videos. Some on YouTube, some on the website.
Yes. So that would work for somebody hosting, if they made sure that they could
exactly
take their computer with them to a session, or in a church, that would be easy to facilitate.
I think in a church, on a large screen, I think some of the videos could work very well. But we also hope that if somebody decides that they want to use this as the kind of guide for their own personal devotions, that it will be easy for people to pretty much go through it all on the screen of their laptop or their tablet.
And I think it looks really appealing. You've done some colour on the printouts, and they're illustrated with cartoons that are really helpful. It's in 2 columns and boxes, with each section has got the minutes that section should take. So you can fit each session into 1 hour, which is brilliant, really well thought out. I mean, I just thought, I looked at it and I just thought, this is so inviting and accessible, and the content is just so thorough and well thought through, that it really jumped out at me as being something to recommend, highly recommend it to other people. So
thank you so much. I mean, what we're keen, that's not strong enough. What we're committed to is doing everything in our power to ensure that the work that we've done over the last 3 years is as accessible as possible, so that it can support the work that the church does in relation to poverty and inequality in a variety of different ways. Some of that is about social action and mission, and the role that the church plays in civil society. Some of that is about the ways in which we reflect and think and pray and sing together in church about our lives as people of faith, and about issues of social justice, and about the nature of our faith in a loving God in an unequal world. And so we hope that the Lent course can help people locally to grapple with these issues and make a difference where they are.
Amen to that. Absolutely. I really think it will. And I really encourage people to take a look and to engage with it. And it's accessible at any level as well. You can come in from whatever your understanding of poverty in the UK is. It really doesn't matter. Or your theological understanding. It's just going to open doorways in a really safe and spirit-led way. So thank you so much, Chris, for
No, thank you, Louisa.
Today. Bless you.
Thank you, and bless you too.